So welcome everybody to the Resilient Communities Spring Grant Cycle Q&A of your community foundation. I'm Janet Catraccia. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the Community Foundation. And first, I just want to thank you all for, I don't know how many different, mission-driven organizations are represented here, but I want to just thank you all for the challenging work you've been doing this past year. The challenges we've all faced are unprecedented, and we've all had to, assess and adjust dramatically during this time of the pandemic. But really, it's leaders like you that have maintained the strength of the mission-driven sector as we've all been so rapidly pivoting to this new virtual environment, as well as all the other services you do, providing in-service, virtual services and in-person services. Many of you have been holding down the forts for your organizations in real time, and you've been providing support to food delivery and children and adults of a wide variety of needs in our community. And I just want to wholeheartedly thank you for the important work. I know this is a time where we all miss that support of our community members and one another, and I just really want to celebrate your work and hold it up for each other. 2020 was the Community Foundation's 20th anniversary, and we had a host of events and celebratory activities that we had prepared for last year. And instead, we had a pretty substantial shift. So we moved into high gear supporting your work and the work of your peers, and ultimately carrying out the work of why we exist as a community foundation. So we certainly, as I'm sure many of your organizations, it's the time of urgency where we really got to know our missions up close and personal, and find innovative ways to carry out that work. And we felt very much in that shared spirit with all of you during this past year. So I want to thank you again for joining us today. And I also want to acknowledge my colleagues who are on the call: George Ferrari, our CEO, Amy Levere, our Chief Philanthropic Services Officer, and Jesse Galbraith-Nocera, our Administrative Coordinator, are all here on the call. And I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint, and you can feel free to ask clarifying questions as I move through that. I don't want this to be an overly formal environment. We all, everyone learns from the questions you guys ask. If you could put your hand up, your virtual hand or your real hand, my colleagues will keep an eye out for that. And feel free, if you're desperate and we're all missing you, just unmic and say, I have a question, which is just fine. So before we get started, I also just want to extend that we're here as a resource to you. We as staff are not making the funding decisions. We're here and we play the role of matchmaker, and we love to hear about what your needs are and how we can work better with and for you. So feel free to reach out to me if you have specific individualized organizational questions that you don't feel comfortable in this larger venue environment to ask, and reach out to me. My email will go up on the screen, and encourage you to do that. So now I'm going to see if we can get this PowerPoint started. Okay. I'm going to first start by because it was our anniversary year, and I want to give you a little bit of a long view and just give you a couple of slides that talk about our long view. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we learned in COVID this past year, and then we'll dive right into the Resilient Communities Spring Grant Cycle. So it was our anniversary year last year. One of the things we've been looking back on is what's been happening at the foundation for the past 10 years. So this is a 10-year look back on our grant making. So you'll see in 2010, we were making just short of, just plus $400,000 or so in grants. And in 2020, we made $2.3 million in grants. So you can see we're a young foundation relative to other foundations in the country. but we certainly have experienced a lot of growth in recent years. And you'll see this navy blue cap on top here is the COVID Response Fund, which I'll talk more about. We had some anomalous years like 2016, where we had just a couple of grants that sort of made that year an anomalous year. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see that this is the growth in the number of grants we've been carrying out year over year. So you can see there's been a steady growth in the number of grants. Many of you on the call have been grants for all of those years. Some of you are new, and hopefully you're all soon to be grantees in the future. So again, this is a pie slice of just our 2020 grant making. We have a variety of different kinds of funds. I'm not going to go into the details of each of those funds today, but we did make $2.3 million in overall grants in 2020 in 572 grants. And 133 of local grantees received grants from the Community Foundation in 2020. Most of our grants come from donor advised funds. That's this big light blue pie slice area. That means the grant comes from a donor advised fund, but many of those grants were inspired by your applications, because as most of you likely know, we share those requests that come in with our donor advised funds, and then they make a grant as a result, in addition to other funds. We have field of interest funds, such as our Women's Fund, Children and Youth Fund. We have a host of field of interest funds we'll talk a little bit about. And then when the pandemic started in March, we quickly launched a COVID-19 response fund. And that granted out $331,000 in 2020, and already another 37,000 or so in 2021. And that fund is weaning down now, because pretty much everything we're all dealing with right now is COVID related. So as I mentioned, we launched that COVID-19 response fund in March, and immediately following that, we opened the COVID-19 rolling grant cycle. And that is an application probably many of you are familiar with. So it's been on our website, and we've just started fielding requests right as they came in. We had a really hotshot community represented review team that mobilized grants very rapidly, and to the tune of up to about $10,000. Those grants typically were. They provided a lot of technical support as a lot of nonprofits moved to the virtual environment. Some nonprofits were better equipped than others with laptops and other types of technology support to make that happen. So a number of our early grants were there to mobilize that capacity for your organizations. We also made a lot of grants related to basic needs right off the bat. So health, related to some testing, both testing equipment at the hospital as well as testing access, grants to Ithaca Car Share and groups that were helping people get access to testing sites, mental health support predominantly later in the year, racial equity certainly, and a lot of around food security, around coordination of services like the Food Task Force and the role that they played in coordinating a lot of food security organizations. We also made grants to areas that help individuals, so like the Robin Fund at GIAC or Catholic Charities, or mini granting entities, so that those mini grants could get mobilized really quickly from groups that are in tune with what's happening. We engaged many knowledgeable and experienced review team members that represented a wide diversity of our community, that again just did a rock star job of mobilizing those grants. And we also early on convened our local funders group, which met 2 times a week in the early weeks. And it was really unprecedented for our local funders to work together so collaboratively. We brought in featured speakers so that we could be kept abreast of important issues that were emerging in the community, shared a lot of information with each other, teamed up to provide collaborative grants together towards some of the great needs in our community, provided technical support dollars for a lot of your nonprofits that accessed professional services. And we also convened a funders panel toward the end of the year so that all of you could come and ask those questions to the local funders. One of the things we learned really early on in the pandemic was that we really need to make funding as flexible as possible for nonprofits. And we are still on that trajectory, and you'll hear more about that in the spring grant cycle launching right now. But we went back and reached out to a lot of organizations that had active grants with the Community Foundation and asked if they wanted those restrictions released, if that would be in service, and many said yes, because we really need to pivot services. So that was an activity we engaged in really early on. And also approved a large number of extensions and repurposing of funds, and you all did a great job of staying in relationship with us too and communicating well. We also launched the Let's Talk series, which hopefully, Amy, if you could maybe, if there's a link you can add to the chat that has a link to our Let's Talk series. So these are once a month. They're issue-based virtual featured discussions of different featured topics like mental health or serving people with disabilities. And we're continuing to build out, Frank Krupra just presented at our last one. We're continuing to build out issue areas. If you have ideas, you can put those in the chat. You could reach out to us, to Amy or another staff member of the Community Foundation, let us know. But we are planning to continue with those, and we've had a really good attendance, and people have appreciated that outreach. Another area that we focused on in 2020, as we always do, but like so many organizations, we really wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the data analysis about how our work is building racial equity and advancing social justice in our community. So we did a deep dive into our granting data and looked from the range from January 1st of 2018 to December 31st of 2020, and found that 79% of our grants fell into a social justice priority area. We defined social justice with these 4 definition areas: racial justice, rural services advocacy, and resource equity. By far, the predominance of our grants fall into resource equity. 9% of our grants fell into that racial justice impact grant, and we're in a strategic planning process right now where we're going to be diving into like what kind of goals do we want to set for ourselves there, and how do we work with our partner organizations throughout the county to advance those goals. And this is part of a much broader conversation around racial equity within the foundation, and we look forward to continuing those and working with your organizations in your advancement of those as well. So you will see questions in our applications related to this issue. One of the resources that we have related to racial justice is on our website. So I think Amy or George, if you could pop the link into the chat. But we encourage you to visit this resource page on our website, which is you'll able to scroll down when you get there and find a lot of resources from local groups doing important work, as well as other national resources for assessment tools and tools that boards might use, and leadership of organizations to advance in these areas. All right, so here are 2021 grant cycles. One of the things we learned from the rolling grant cycle of COVID last year is, while we did get a lot of asks initially, as the year wore on, it was more challenging for organizations to know whether or not their particular need area warranted an application in the COVID grant cycle. So we heard a lot of feedback, interestingly and somewhat counterintuitively, that said we really appreciate sort of the deadlines of knowing like when we have to have the application in, we can plan around it, and then if extenuating circumstances occur in terms of needs outside of those grant cycle timeframes, you can consult with me. So we're always in a learning space, and this year is certainly a learning space. So this is our model for this year that is always evolving. So stay tuned on our website as those plans evolve. But this is the plan for the due dates for these main grant cycles. The library grant cycle we're in the midst of that now. That due date has already passed, and only the 33 libraries in the Finger Lakes Library System are eligible for that. So just want to be very clear on who's eligible for that grant cycle. Resilient Communities Spring Grant Cycle, we hope to mirror this grant cycle in the fall. We'll likely learn some things and might tweak it a little bit, but the spirit of the general operating support that we're aspiring to grant out in this particular grant cycle, we will do again in the fall. And there's the due dates, April 14th for the spring grant cycle, October 13th for the fall. And again, if there's needs that your organization has that you feel like it doesn't fit those timeframes, or there's a greater urgency to it, please reach out to me, consult with me, and we can brainstorm together on ways that the foundation can support you. So we're going to focus in now on our spring grant cycle. So as I just mentioned, we're shifting. So those of you who have been grantees of the Community Foundation for years know that our spring grant cycle has predominantly focused around programmatic areas. And I have another slide that talks about those programmatic areas, but we're really moving beyond that and shifting out into general operating because of what we learned during last year of the flexibility that organizations need to quickly adapt. We think this is, and I've heard from you that this is really what's needed right now. So these are very unrestricted dollars, and so your applications will likely be far less program focused and more mission focused. So so we really want to give you those dollars in ways that you can put them where they're needed most. And we want to continue to foster that culture of assessment and adjustment, so you don't feel hemmed in and pinned down by restrictions of a grant that you might get. Not that we have a history of that, but we want to give you even more flexibility. And we're really going to be looking for an emphasis, and we're desiring an emphasis on supporting and strengthening your capacity to carry out your mission. So there's so many, we understand there's so many unknowns as we move into sort of the post-pandemic environment. It was a struggle to figure out how to shift to the pandemic environment and the virtual environment. But now there's a lot of unknowns about what does a hybrid environment look like? What is some people working virtually, some people working in person, and a combination of those things, depending on what your organization is looking at. So we really want to give you the space to be focused on your mission, and what needs to happen, for your organization to effectively carry that out, so that your focus is not on, oh, what are they funding? What are they funding? So we'll put our dollars there, but really more on we're getting this operating so that we can achieve our mission goals. So this grant cycle, while prioritizing general operating support, it's a higher range. So historically, the spring grant cycle has been up to $5,000. This year, their grants are $500 to $10,000. We have more assets available. Our donors have been very generous, whether it's through the COVID Response Fund or through their own donor advised funds. Our board worked very hard to increase our discretionary funding this year, so that there's more dollars available for all of you. And our board also made some unprecedented decisions around some of our endowed funds, releasing a larger percentage of those funds than in prior years. So while this spring grant cycle has historically granted out somewhere between maybe 80,000 and 130,000, this year we're anticipating 220,000, upwards of $220,000. And the reason for that is because as we share your requests with our existing donor advised funds, we can never predict what will get picked up, but always additional funds do. So I'm very, very excited about that level of funding availability. All of these applications, as I mentioned at the beginning, are reviewed by a community represented review team. Lots of different eyes see your application. So there's community represented review teams that are going to read through it. There's the summaries of the applications you submit will get reviewed by our donor advisors, and they can ask to see the full application and dive in a little deeper. We also have active advisory committees like our Women's Fund Advisory Committee, which our Women's Fund's been extremely active this past year, very very engaged in meetings with their grantees or prospective grantees, meeting with leaders of color, along with our community impact committee to talk about what communities of color need to be supportive. And so that's very different in a community foundation than some other funders. We're not the same 6 people, for example, looking at your application year after year. We really magnify philanthropy by sharing your requests with many different individuals who can then learn about your mission and the work that you're doing. We prefer 1 application per organization. I understand that that can be challenging for some of the larger organizations that have multiple areas that they might seek funding for. You can apply again in the fall grant cycle, or you can, if you're not ready to apply now, you might choose to go in the fall grant cycle. And if you feel like there's some extenuating circumstances and you have questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to explore that with you further. Are there questions? Because I see the orange chat box lit up, but I can't see it.
So Janet, one question we just had was, will the Women's Fund be included in the fall cycle, or are they just funding in the spring cycle?
Oh, great question. So yes, typically the Women's Fund has been responsive to just their applications being in the spring, but this year they're doing both. So they have a chunk of available funds and they're planning to divide that between the spring and the fall. So great question.
And one other question, folks wanted to know whether or not previous grantees that applied in the spring cycle and gotten support from the Holland Foundation, are they still part of the spring grant cycle?
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk about here. So the Holland Foundation was sort of the brainchild of this grant cycle. Well, I started 14 years ago and it was prior to that. So it was a long time ago. And the Holland Foundation assets, which are about $50,000, those invest in aging, children and youth, animal welfare, and environmental preservation. Those Holland dollars are still available in this spring grant cycle, not the fall, but it's not to say that those issues aren't still a priority for other funds within the Community Foundation. So all of these areas, so historically, this grant cycle has only been in service to these 5 areas. Now it's much larger than that. So you're not restricted to those particular issue areas in this grant cycle anymore. And to note too, that the Holland Foundation assets are written in such a way that the animal welfare and environmental preservation priority areas are available in Broome County as well as Tompkins County. That's very unique. Generally, our priority area is Tompkins County, but this remains. If you're a historic Holland applicant from Broome County for environment or animal welfare, you're still welcome to apply. And this information is included in the application. So when you click on any of these areas, you'll see a little descriptor come out, so you'll have a sense of what that particular fund is in support of. All right, so again, flexible operating support. We certainly can't provide funding for all the nonprofits in this grant cycle, but we do our best to play that matchmaking role. And we're matchmaking between donors and funds and funders, our board, and best practices in the field. So a lot of things come together in these grant cycles to really advance this kind of support. Some of the organizations, you might be applying for needs that you had, or your mission and your primary areas that you're discussing in your application might have existed prior to the pandemic. They might be very new as a result of pandemic stressors. This grant cycle is not limited in any way in that particular area, but we very much would like to learn from you about what how the pandemic has influenced your organization and your capacity to advance your mission. And we often play this role. I really want you to read the applications and those questions and answer them through the lens of, we're learning from you. You are the experts. And when you share with us meaningful information that you've learned, we advance that information and that knowledge to so many other donors in the community. Some of our funds, as I mentioned, are very specialized, but many are very general. And of course, we have those discretionary funds that are completely general. So So lots of opportunities for funding and to find a possible match. We share, Amy shares the summaries of your applications with the donor advised funds. That's over 135 individuals that would see those summaries. So you'll note that those areas that Howland has historically focused on is in this list as well. So because we have these specialized funds and we're playing this matchmaking role with all of these different funds and all of these different needs in the community, the application has a little bit of a new format where if your particular organization, if your organization's mission falls within any of these areas, I encourage you to tick that off in the application, to check that box. And you can check more than one box. And then make sure the content of your responses to the questions highlight how it relates to those particular issues. Because, for example, the Women's Fund is interested in seeing applications that are related to the needs of women in our community. So if you click the women checkbox in the application, then we know for sure that application will now go and be reviewed by the advisors of the Women's Fund. So by checking these, you're assuring that your application will be seen by funds or the advisors of funds that are specifically interested in that particular area. If you check no boxes, that's fine. You're still going to be reviewed by the whole review team, and there's still discretionary and general funds available to support. But this helps us target it for those specialty areas. Are there any questions on that? And I'm assuming someone will tell me because I can't see them if there are. All right, so application content. So remember, historically, you've seen a lot of questions around program and programmatic areas and outcomes and all those types of things. This is a pretty substantial shift for the Community Foundation and perhaps for many of you if you're not accustomed to requesting general operating support. So here's examples of some of the questions in the application. There's not right or wrong answers to these. These are learning questions for the review team members and for the many fund advisors, but there's going to be a strong emphasis on what's your organization's mission. I suspect that for a lot of organizations, this time has been a time of thinking very strategically and intentionally about mission and whether or not services have engaged in sort of mission drift or whether or not they've remained very on target, whether or not there's a time to reassess mission, those types of things. But there's going to be a strong emphasis on how is the range of programs you are providing in support of your mission. How is your organization delivering on its mission? What do you need most this year to accomplish your mission? And tell us about the changing needs of your organization in the pandemic environment, especially as it continues to change and these unknown situations continue to arise. What did you learn this past year that you're going to continue to build on? What are the new needs that you might be anticipating, and how are you gathering this information? Asking, what's your organization most proud of during the pandemic? It might be something large and substantial. It might be something small that maybe you were able to meet some challenges that you weren't anticipating. Maybe it has to do with your internal, capacity. But again, a question that's a learning question for us. And then, how has your organization been setting goals to track its progress during these past several months? And what goals do you have for the next year as we continue to open up post-pandemic environment? And as always, we have a strong emphasis at the Community Foundation on collaboration. We really want to know, especially in this virtual environment where there can be a lot of isolation, how are you very intentionally reaching out to your peer organizations who share common goals? How are you collaborating? Many of the food serving organizations found, really creative and impressive ways to collaborate this past year. But other organizations that are moving in other environments might have some, unique challenges. So if you're finding collaboration to be very challenging, then you'd also want to talk about that too. What are the barriers to collaboration right now that have emerged? Not unlike our COVID application this past year, we want to know how your organization's capacity has been affected by COVID, and about your ongoing capacity. Perhaps you had to, make some hard choices. Perhaps staff needed to be furloughed. Perhaps you slimmed down. Perhaps demand for services increased and you built out capacity and staff and other resources. So tell us about that. We want to learn from you. What you experienced sort of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then what you're sort of anticipating or hoping for in this post-pandemic environment. We also want to ask, we're going to ask questions about diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice. So is racial equity a part of your work? You're going to see these types of questions, which of course, many of these have been historically in our fall grant cycle, not as much in our spring grant cycle, but you're going to see these types of questions embedded throughout our grant cycles moving forward. And we're starting with some very general questions to help learn from you. How is racial equity a part of your work? And if it's not, what are the barriers to that? What have the barriers been? And have you developed anti-racist policies and practices within your organization? And give us some examples. And if not, what are your plans for developing them? We also encourage you, if you need to advance these issues with your board members, this is an opportunity to say to your board member, hey, our local funders are asking these questions. We really need to advance these issues at our governance level. So so hopefully we're working with you on that. And then there is, rather than program budgets, there's a broad organizational revenue chart and a broad organizational expense chart. These are an Excel spreadsheet that you'll be able to download. They're very flexible. It's not intended to have you, force yourself into a pretzel with your organization's numbers. You can add rows if you need that are defined a little bit more appropriately for the unique needs of your organization. That's fine. We would like to know where, something about your funding sources. And whether it's government, like PPP related or CARES Act related, or other local or national foundations. So it's pretty intuitive, but if it's difficult, feel free to contact me or Jesse, and we can help you get through that. And also we've built right into this a place to put notes. So you can add a little bit like, hey, here's what I included in this line item, but this is broad strokes. This is your whole organization. And note the 3 columns. There's the first column, because we're looking for change. We're looking to see the impact of the pandemic, right? So we want to get evidence of that change over time. So the 2019 or fiscal year prior to the pandemic. So these should be actual expenses at this point. And then the 2020 fiscal year, depending if your fiscal year was, mid-year to mid-2021, you might still be in it, or it might be over with, depending on where your fiscal year lands. So that should represent that. And then your 2021 or fiscal year post-pandemic. So this is your budget for what's upcoming. And we want to get a sense of how your overall organization's been affected. So same thing with expenses. It's built the same way, and it has some flexibility. Again, you can add rows if that is helpful to you. I can already see here. You need to update a formula, it looks like, but it's pretty straightforward. So many of you on the call, I know, are seasoned applicants with the Community Foundation, but we always and are often operating in that environment of being seed money for new organizations, or being in relationship with nascent organizations that are just getting started, or collaborators, or who are fiscally sponsored by one of your organizations. So just a quick, how-to right here. Our application is, you can start right on our home page of our website and go to this grant opportunities section under the drop down of granting, and perhaps somebody can put that website in there. And then you scroll down to the 2021 Resilient Community Spring Grant Cycle, and you'll see Community Force. In fact, any of the links in there to Community Force will get you hooked up to our grants management platform. And then when you're there, you can either log in or create a new account. And you're welcome to do that. Even if you're not sure if you're going to apply or you just want to see what the application looks like, that's fine. Go ahead, start an account, get in there, navigate it. And in the process, you might say, all right, we're not really ready to do this until the fall. That's fine. And then this is sort of your dashboard. There's these three sections. So there's this agency information, which is familiar to past grant cycles, resilient community section. And then this is the signature request. So remember, for those of you who are new to this, you're going to have to get an electronic signature from your executive director, as well as one of your board officers. It's all done online. It's very easy. You put in their name and email, it sends it to them. And as long as you have those signature requests sent, you can submit the application. And the two people who you've requested signatures from have actually until 2 days after the due date to respond to those emails for your application to come to 100%. But you can submit as long as those have been requested. Technical questions along the way, if you have trouble logging in or you're getting, losing any information or kicked out or whatever's happening, hopefully there's not any of those technical issues, but if there are, reach out to Jessie Galbraith-Nucera at her email here. And if you have content related questions, reach out to me, or if you want to do some brainstorming or want to just, consult about what you're thinking about, feel free to reach out to me. And that is pretty much the big points of the spring grant cycle. So I'm happy to field any questions people might have. And have other things shown up in the chat? And if you want to leave now, there's no pressure to hang on. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will post this on our website, and we'll post the PowerPoint as well, so that you have quick access to those.
So there is one question about emails for folks for us to contact with questions. I'll do that. Basically, Janet, who has just been presenting, is the one for the content, and then Jessie Galbraith-Nucera is the technical. Why won't this application form work on the website? How do I get that fixed? Those are Jessie questions, but I'll put those in there for you.
And if any other of my colleagues want to chime in and have anything else to add, or any other questions, feel free. And if people at this point, if you just want to unmute and say, I have a question, that's welcome. Just so you know, so part of this Let's Talk series I mentioned, we do have our next Let's Talk is April 6th at noon. It's from 12 to 12:30. And I will be talking about our COVID impact. So I mentioned a little bit of that today. We do have a list online of all of the COVID related grants that we made from our COVID response fund through December 31st. If Amy, I think, has that ready. Maybe you've already posted it in the chat.
Yes, I'm just posting the link to the event on April 6th, so people will know about it there.
Wonderful. So if you want to learn more about those COVID, and if you have board members or colleagues or friends who just want to learn more about what's happening at the Community Foundation, would love to have you join us for that event as well. It will be virtual.
So Janet, there's another question in the chat box. Now, people wanted to know if we applied to the Charitable Gift Fund, I'm assuming we mean the Tompkins Charitable Gift Fund, are we still able to apply for Resilient Communities? So we're two separate organizations, and yes, you are.
Exactly. We did do some collaborating with other local funders, specifically in the early months of COVID, where we were sharing asks because we really wanted to lighten the burden for nonprofits that were in crisis mode of needing dollars. So sometimes you might have made application to another entity and Community Foundation funded it, or vice versa. We're still doing a little bit of that, but at this point we're predominantly back in sort of our traditional roles in terms of making applications. So yes, we are a different entity from them and do not review their applications at this point. Great questions.
We do keep track of some of those other organizations for you, and on our website, we're going to inundate you with links. We apologize. But we have a lot of info on our website. We love when you use it. I'm going to share with you now some of the other information we have from other funders, just FYI.
Awesome.
Seeing a lot of nice feedback that you all are liking our shift to general operating away from programmatic for this year. People are very pleased with that, Janet.
Great. And if there's, you know, again, if there's specific program areas when you're describing your general services that you'd like to hone in on in your application, that's always still welcome. We love to learn about the wide variety of programs you're carrying out.
Janet, sometimes people have a question. I don't see it yet, but let's ask it. So we know when the applications are due and we review them. When might we anticipate results on our applications?
That's a great question. We have worked really hard to try to, you know, compress that time, because we know, especially around summer programming, our spring grant cycle historically has funded some, you know, youth summer programs, things like that. So my timeline, our goal for applicant notification at this point is May 1st, which is, you know, great for some organizations and programs. We can never sort of find the perfect date, but we're really trying to compress it into that time frame so that we can turn these around rapidly. So that's our goal. Other questions? I kind of feel like everybody should just unmute. No, I don't know. To talk to each other. This is the time where after the Q&A, we all sort of chat in the room, and I'm not sure the best way to do that with 55 people on the call. But if you have something you'd like to share or clarify, and you think it might be helpful to other applicants on the call, please do.
Janet, I also think because we had to go through and mute everybody coming in, that everybody's muted and they have to ask to be unmuted. So.
Oh no, can we just unmute everybody?
I just unmuted.
You can unmute yourselves. I think.
Amy. Janet, I have the review team meeting May 6th, and
Maybe
yeah, so I think it's not May 1st. I think it might be later.
I'm looking at it. Maybe I'm looking at an older document. Glad you said that.
Yeah. So
Right. Yeah, you're right. It is later. So
sorry.
Yeah. No, you're right. I was looking at the wrong document. May 13th. Yeah, it's going to be middle of May. It's going to be. Yeah. It's going to depend, frankly, on how many applications we get in, because this takes a lot of our volunteers' time to get through them. So we have our meetings planned, and then depending on the timing it takes to get through those. So I would say the third week in May is actually probably more likely for notification. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me, because sometimes there's things happening early in the grant cycle that we can, if you have a pressing program or need that's waiting, you can consult with me on that. But
it's
yeah,
kind of like spring. It's kind of like spring. We know it's going to come. We know we want to happen sooner. When it happens, we'll be excited, but often we have to wait longer than we want. So, you know, just think of yourself like a tulip.
So I was just saved there by my community impact chair, Ann Martin. So thank you, Ann, for being more on top of dates than I am at this point.
Another question we have just now coming in, Janet, is what are the reporting expectations for this grant?
Great question. So historically, you're familiar, if you're a grantee, familiar with the types of questions that are reports. I think you'll find the report is a more generalized report that reflects those questions around mission and how how your, what your goals are and whether or not you are advancing on your mission. It might merit you reporting in on sort of the general happenings of a variety of programs, but it's not going to be as evaluation and data heavy as our traditional reports, at least for this cycle, because this is a transition time. We're really trying to create these flexible dollars in this post-pandemic environment. And so it doesn't mean they might not shift again next year as we move into the next round of grant cycles. But right now, this is the space we understand organizations are in, and we really want to support that. So it will not be an onerous report, and might even, we might do a little bit more with meeting with organizations and hearing from you and having a little bit more personal contact as well.
So I would love to say something.
Hi, Elle.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to share just my reaction, what a relief it is to hear from the most prominent funder in our area that you have made this shift, that instead of having to, come up with programs that will convince their own, in their own merits, that it's the organization's mission and vision that you're going to get behind. And when you say that you're going to be, again, like working towards making the reporting simpler and easier, all of that is just so helpful to know. And it feels like a physical relief, because during this whole time, so many of us are, working way beyond our own capacity, because we've had a lot less support from from staff, from board members. The needs have gone higher. Everything has just been so hard, and just hearing this today is just really meaningful and really helpful, and I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing, Yael. Well, this is because of the honest communication that our mission-driven organizations provide to us. So when you guys are authentic and transparent with us about what your needs are, we're able to respond accordingly. And so that many of you, take wonderfully healthy and appropriate risks in sharing, like, this is what's working, this is what's not working, and we all benefit from that, and we're able to magnify philanthropy through that. So I propose, and I think somebody had written this, and this is kind of what I was thinking too, I would love to throw everybody into breakout rooms just for these last few minutes, not with any agenda other than to network, say who you are, say hello, and share a little bit. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. We're going to turn the recording off. But I do want to thank everybody who's been here today, and I look forward to hearing more from you, to learning more about what's going on with your organizations, and please, introduce yourself and to others in your breakout room. I'm going to send folks there now.